This is the second video in a series about modernizing roller-delayed guns, Part 2, the MP5 platform. This is PTR Industries' semi-tactical MP5 clone, the 9CT601. They also make the 9KT, which is an MP5K clone, and the 9R, which is an HK94 clone with a stock and 16-inch barrel. Our goal with this video is to outfit a PTR 9CT to try to get it on par with what can be done with a more modern pistol caliber carbine. There's no question the MP5 is more controllable and more pleasant to shoot than the entire crop of straight blowback subguns, to include the CZ Scorpion, Beretta CX4 Storm, a lot of 9mm ARs, and the Ruger PCC. That's all fine and good for a range toy, but if you actually want to use it for something, you're going to need an optic and a weapon light for a start. Back in the MP5's heyday, weapon lights were attached with hose clamps and laser sights were powered by motorcycle batteries. Our standards are a lot higher now. One question I got over and over on the last video was, what's the point? Well, it's about 90% curiosity. There's still a perception of the MP5 platform as the cream of the crop when it comes to SMGs or pistol caliber carbines. I think that perception has endured mostly because of the high cost of the MP5 and its derivative clones. Surely they wouldn't charge $3,000 for an SP5 unless it was 6 times better than a Ruger PC, right? If you take value into consideration, the MP5 platform makes no sense compared to most of the recent glut of modern PCCs. A stock MP5 is so limited in capability and features that it hardly seems worth the asking price. But if the MP5 platform is really that great, it must be worth the frustration of equipping it like a newer, cheaper gun. And the other 10% is that I always really wanted one of these, and once I had one, I really wanted to shoot it with night vision. I would highly recommend you never buy night vision. It really restructures your range priorities. Like with the PTR 91, we have some out-of-the-box issues we need to solve. Aside from recoil, they're pretty much the same as the 91. The 9CT is essentially useless out of the box. It needs a brace or a stock before you can even really shoot it. We also need to pick the right optic, and we need to figure out how to mount and control our accessories with a limited amount of rail space and the lack of a 12 o'clock accessory rail on the Handguard. This, by the way, turned out to be the real killer. I started out trying to get this thing configured for night vision. That was such a headache that I gave up and just decided to settle for having a simple weapon light. And even that was bizarrely difficult to do. Once again, there are some problems we can't solve. It's got the same fucked up battery of arms as the PTR 91. Roller delayed guns are cumbersome to reload. That's just how it is on this bitch of an earth. Alright, let's go. The 9CT, as it ships from PTR, is basically a useless gun-safe packing peanut. Before we even fire a single round through this gun, we need to put a brace on it. So now your expensive gun is even more expensive, and it doesn't fit in the fancy locking hard case they ship it in. Fantastic, I'm looking forward to dragging this empty case around for the rest of my life. The 9CT and the 9KT don't accept the same braces because the receiver length and geometry is different at the rear end. Some of the Middle East MP5 clone manufacturers make a reverse stretch of the MP5K, which has the short MP5K front and a longer MP5 rear end, so it can use normal stocks and braces. Like an idiot, I started out with the HKPDW brace for the 9CT. It's a collapsing style 3-position brace, extremely rickety and extremely expensive. It's also way too fucking heavy. It gives you an uncomfortable chin weld, but hey, it looks cool, and that's all that matters. I don't see the point of this brace. The gun actually compacts down shorter if you use a folding brace, so I downgraded immediately to the SB Tactical SBT5A folding brace. This brace doesn't look clone correct, if that matters. Pro tip, it fucking doesn't. But it works significantly better. It makes the gun shorter when folded at the cost of some width. Better for putting in most bags if that's important to you. The cheek weld experience is also much better, and it's very stable. The PDW collapsing brace has an absurd amount of vertical play. I like the SB Tactical folding brace a lot. It's probably my favorite part on the whole gun. If I chose to SBR the gun, I would have significantly more stock options, but I don't think I like this gun enough to keep it forever. Honestly, I would probably replace the folding brace with the B&T folding stock, which is basically a stock version of the exact same thing. I would also consider the Spur MP5 stock, since it offers inline recoil and a cheek riser for 3 points of contact when shooting with high-mounted red dots, just like the one for the G3. I'd say the comfort and handling would be worth the trade-offs for a non-folding or collapsing stock. Greatly increased capability, greatly diminished portability. Up next, I replaced the original grip module with the Magpul SL and the Magpul upgraded safety lever. This is not a necessary upgrade, but it does make the gun a lot more comfortable. The grip is nicer, has a better texture and a better angle, and a storage compartment. I don't store things in my guns, so who gives a shit. The Magpul grip eliminates a hot spot in the webbing of your hand. Their safety upgrade is also pretty nice. It makes it way easier to throw the safety from both sides of the gun without breaking your grip. It's almost too easy though. The safety lever is a little too easy to break out of either the fire or safe detent positions. While we're down here talking about the grip and the safety, I'll mention the trigger. The trigger has a flat face and a fairly light pull, but it's creepy and stagey. I don't really give a fuck. I can shoot fast enough and I don't really care about triggers at all. Sorry. Back to the important stuff. Optics. Once again, we find ourselves at the mercy of the compromised ergonomics of the gun. The HK drum sights are my favorite style of iron sights, but they do sit really low, so stocks and braces for these guns are designed to accommodate that. The only way to get a solid cheek weld with a red dot is to use a super low mount, which translates to a lower third co-witness on an MP5 and also places the dot right on top of the front sight hood. Since you shoot with both eyes open using red dots, your non-dominant eye picks up the slack a bit, but it can also do that on an optic with the lens cap on, and nobody really seriously recommends you do that. An absolute co-witness mount puts you well above the iron sights, so much so that you can see the irons through most open red dot mounts, and it turns your cheek weld into a somewhat compromised chin weld. A lower third co-witness riser gives you so much height it's almost like using a super high night vision compatible mount on an AR. And if you go completely nuts, you can do what I did and use a leftover Scalarworks 1.93 night vision height riser, placing the optic so high you can use it while hip firing Rambo style. None of these options are any good. I tried putting a Trijicon MRO with a super low mount on the gun and that was nearly perfect. The size of the MRO put the dot above the top of the front sight hood. Unfortunately, you already know how I feel about the MRO, so that came back off pretty much right away. I had been using a SIG Romeo 5 with the standard mount, which sits at an absolute co-witness height on an AR. The body of the Romeo 5 mount is see-through, kind of like a Scalarworks, so you can actually use the irons through the mount as a backup option. This optic is just barely high enough for me to use with night vision, although I run the risk of clocking my Envy device with the rear drum sight if I'm not careful. At this height, the cheek weld is mostly a chin weld, so the gun isn't as stable and in my experience less natural to raise into an immediate sight picture since it doesn't index as naturally. Not having your face as a third point of contact costs you recoil control as well. Right now I have it set up with an Eotech XPS3, not an EXPS3, which sits a little higher. The XPS3 on the 9CT is barely high enough for use with night vision and barely low enough that it doesn't ruin your cheek weld. Basically what I'm saying is every option is a significant compromise due to the limitations of the platform. My recommendation if you're really serious about this and you don't want to use night vision is put a low mounted red dot on there and use a Dremel to cut off part of the front sight hood. Up next is the Handguard and accessory mounts. The 9CT comes with a PTR branded M-LOK rail. It has 3, 6, and 9 o'clock slots and is ventilated on the other angles. It does work pretty well, but I wanted to have more accessory mounting options, so I immediately replaced it with a Midwest Industries rail. The Midwest rail has 45-degree slots on 3 corners, but not the top left because of the clearance of the charging handle and cocking tube. The Midwest rail also looks like it's extended farther than the factory rail, but it actually has less effective slots than the PTR on the 3 and 9 o'clock positions because it has built-in sling QDs. The farther forward slots are only on the 6 o'clock, the 4:30, and the 7:30. Pretty much no point in mounting anything there. I did initially mount a light with an inline scout mount on the 1:30 rail slot, but it turns out you can just use an offset scout mount on the 3 o'clock and get the exact same light placement, so I swapped back to the PTR rail. We've been through this nightmare already in the PTR 91 video, but all of the available tri-rails are heavy, bulky, and really expensive. Tri-rails and quad rails are trash weight because they use extra material to provide mounting space that you would never use in a million years unless you want to mount a weapon light behind your own hand. I played accessory musical chairs for hours with 2 different rails trying to figure out how to get a usable weapon light on this fucking thing. The problem is endemic to the HK roller delay design. You lose the top because of the cocking tube, and then you basically lose the left side due to the cocking handle. You can't have anything that intrudes into the path of the cocking handle or anything that occludes your access to the cocking handle. Fuck. One particularly autistic configuration of the PTR involved a Surefire M300V dual-mode light on the 3 o'clock, Holosun 117IR on the 6 o'clock, controlled by a Unity taps pressure switch attached to the right side of the gun with adhesive, because the tap switch is longer than the entire run of M-LOK on the Handguard. This was functionally pretty close to usable, but really uncomfortable. It's bulky in all the wrong places, and the wire management was a disaster because cables can't run over the cocking tube without getting in the way. There was just barely enough room for me to get my hand on it, and trying to re-index your hand after taking it off the gun was anything but ergonomic. It took a few seconds to figure out how to get your hand on it every single time. Holy shit, what a pain in the ass. In the end, I gave up on being truly happy ever again and just settled for a standard weapon light. Currently, the gun has a Surefire scout light on an Arisaka offset mount on the right side of the gun. The Arisaka mount tucks it up into the gun pretty nicely. I'm using a Surefire pressure switch as well, with a Magpul mount on the left side of the gun. The wire for the pressure switch runs through the handguard and under the barrel. Using a Magpul AFG, you can kind of C-clamp the gun, and you can kind of activate the tape switch without moving your hands, kind of. I mean, the whole thing just sucks. A combo unit like the Zenitco Klesh IR, Surefire X400V, or Streamlight VAR2 might be a good choice on a gooseneck rail. You'd get white light, IR light, and an IR laser all in one system, controlled by one switch. It might interfere with the suppressor though. It's kind of amazing that with all these M-LOK slots, we still can't make something half as good as the old school lighted Surefire forend. Honestly, I wouldn't judge you for just using one of those. I can't even put a forward sling attachment on the gun without intruding into where my support hand goes. At some point, I used a Strike Industries M-LOK angled sling QD attachment. That almost worked. I tried a Magpul paraclip adapter. Again, it almost worked. It takes up too much space and interferes too much with the charging handle. I'm resigned to just using single point bungee slings instead. I have a Magpul paraclip to QD adapter in the QD slot on the brace. Up next, magazines. We don't have to do any thinking about magazines with the PTR 91 because surplus HKG3 magazines are phenomenal, they're dirt cheap, and you can buy them in bulk. That is not the case with the MP5 platform. Mostly what I've been using are the KCI Gen 2 magazines. Supposedly these are greatly improved over the Gen 1s. I'm willing to believe that because I never had any issues with these mags, and Korean mags don't normally have a great reputation. I used a handful of the 30s and a couple of the 20s. I had no issues with any of them, so at least you can get some decent mags for a decent price. I've seen some PTR branded metal magazines out there on the internet. I'm honestly not sure what those are. I wonder if they were made by KCI as the OEM for PTR. They're too expensive for me to take chances on an unknown. At that point, you might as well just buy the real HKs. As for reliability, the gun has been flawless. There's really nothing to say here at all. I ran a ton of cheap ammunition using the KCI and the ETS magazines. No jams and no failures at all with the KCI magazines, not even once. Only one failure with an ETS magazine, a failure to go into battery on the first round of a full magazine. I'm very pleased to report that I finally got a PTR that works. Shootability. MP5s are really nice to shoot. They're just soft and pleasant. The awkward handling of a G3 isn't nearly as bad when you scale it down so everything is in reach. The charging handle is much easier to operate because it doesn't need compound leverage to break the rollers free. It's got a shorter length of travel and you don't have to skin your knuckles on the stupid lever every single time. Just pretend I totally didn't know it was empty just then. All that being said, the MP5 is still not going to be as controllable as something like the Sig Sauer MPX, or probably the CMMG Banshee, both of which have straight-line recoil and much lighter recoiling mass. So what's the conclusion? Can the MP5 be modernized? Barely. The G3 pattern rifle is a huge platform, a massive blank canvas you can build off of. The MP5 platform is limited by size. Can you live with these issues? Of course. You can also live with total renal failure, thanks to the miracle of hemodialysis. The moral of the story, just like last time, is don't. If you want a modern tactical gun to do tactical cool stuff with, this ain't it, Chief. PTR's interpretation of the MP5 is especially strange, and it seems caught between a half-assed attempt to modernize and a half-assed attempt to be clone correct, whatever the fuck that means. On the one hand, you get a nice M-LOK handguard and a welded optics rail, but on the other hand, they made sure to faithfully reproduce the little hook on the left side of the magwell, which somehow factors into the use of a 3-point HK sling. Top scientists still aren't sure how it works or why anyone would ever use a 3-point sling. All it does is get in the way and snag on your gear. I'm tempted to Dremel this piece of shit right off the fucking gun. MP5s are toys. It's a toy. It's an expensive toy. I've complained to a lot of MP5 owners and MP5 knockoff owners while I was fucking around with this ancient creaking dinosaur of a firearm, and they tend to respond to all criticisms with the same weak defense. It's fun! Good lord. Of course it's fun. Guns are fucking awesome. Shooting them is literally better than sex. But the MP5 is a septuagenarian design that can't be made to fill a role that even a crude, blowback 9mm AR conversion can. You have to spend an outrageous amount of money to even get kind of close. The problem with the MP5 isn't that it's old or even that it's difficult to configure with modern tactical shit. The problem is that it's all of those things and it's also expensive. There's nothing wrong with a basic gun you can shoot well, but if you go out of your way to spend $2,000 on a gun that's inarguably worse and less capable than a gun that costs half of that, you are a stupid person. And if you go on to defend that purchase by arguing that people have been stacking bodies with iron sights for hundreds of years, you're worse than a stupid person. You're a stupid person making a disingenuous argument, and you're deluding anyone unfortunate enough to take your advice at face value.
Damn, you're a SAS operator.
Oh man, I wish I had the mag light on the top. I hate this gun. That being said, the PTR 9CT is probably the best version of the MP5 from a practical standpoint, and hopefully you can hear the air quotes around the word practical. It needs the least amount of work in aftermarket parts, and it's the cheapest one you can actually get right now. For some reason, the Turkish and Pakistani clones increased in price to match or exceed the MSRP of a genuine HK. The more faithfully an MP5 clone replicates the shortcomings of the MP5, the worse it is, but if you're just a clone fag, you might as well buy the HK to try to convince yourself that you're based because you supported an arrogant manufacturer from a dying cucked country. This gun is awesome, and it sucks, and it's useless, and it's fun. If that was really enough for you, you probably wouldn't have watched this video to begin with. Thanks for watching. See you later.
Cringe. You good?
Yeah.
Does this work? Can I? Oh, I can.
Yeah.
Someone on K told me I could.
Jesus.
Christ.